Hello, I'm Bill Leipold. Welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Joining me is Desmond Lun, Associate Professor at the Center for Computational and Integrative Biology at Rutgers Camden. Desmond, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bill.
Glad you're here. Your title is Computational Biologist, or your occupation. Can you give me a kind of an overview of what a computational biologist does?
Okay, so it's actually not such a simple question just because it's a fairly new area.
Okay.
Broadly speaking, a computational biologist is anyone who applies computers and computation to solving biological problems. I guess that's not that useful, but just to give you a couple of examples. So, for example, computer modeling of living cells or living systems, which is something that I do quite a lot of. Another area, which is a big area in computational biology, is using computers to help analyze or to help humans understand these large biological data sets that are being created now. So, in particular, DNA sequence data, which is being produced in very, very large quantities now. So the problem is just that as humans, we have, it's very hard to comprehend or to make sense of all of this data, and computers can help us do that.
I think I'm going to look at you and say, honestly, I'm a little confused.
Okay, no, that's all right.
Because I don't often think of computers and biology going together. So how does one become interested in this area?
So yeah, that's actually kind of a funny question as well, because when I went to school, and I think it's probably still somewhat the case now, right? I mean, people who go into biology are typically the people who, for whatever reason, don't like maths and they don't like computer science, and they've kind of gone that direction. And then, people who go into computer science or math are typically the people who are, just can't cope very well with all the detail that's involved in biology. I just don't really like that. But I think what we're going to see more and more of is that because using computers is just becoming a necessary part of where biology as a science is going, that area is going to develop. And so biologists are, as part of their training, going to become more and more competent, just going to require some level of computer competency.
Okay.
And I think you're going to find that computational biology is going to develop as sort of an important sub-discipline of computer science in itself.
So I want to make sure I understand how you got involved, and I understand your interest. I think I want to backtrack just to make sure I kind of get it.
Okay.
So from a non-scientist perspective, what I'm hearing you say is that you're taking some of the traditional biology kind of context, whether they be cells, whether it be a disease or something like that, and then putting it into a computer program to track some of the data, track some of the transformation so that folks kind of have that on a map in some ways, those kind of areas? Are we on the same page?
Yeah, that's kind of what it's about. I mean, I think what's happening with biology as a science is that, so for the past 50 years or so, people have spent a long, long time working out how, small systems in biology, in living cells work, and really getting into the detail and working out how these little systems work at a mechanistic detail. Now what's happening is that, so we understand all these little components, but how they actually come together to make life work is still very much a mystery. But to answer that question, we really need, it's really beyond, sort of one human mind to be able to understand all of those connections and how they go together. And so that's really where computers are beginning to play a much larger and larger role in biology.
In reading your background and in reading your academic background, it seems also that you can't do this in a vacuum. It seems in some ways it's very collaborative, and you really rely on not just scholars that are, say, 10 feet down the hallway from you, but folks who are around the globe. So can you talk about kind of how you've collaborated with folks to kind of get to kind of what you're working on? Yeah,
so my work is very collaborative. When I publish papers, there are typically very, very many people on it. And I like that. For me, I mean, there's this idea that, sort of this ivory tower idea of scientists as being people who like to sort of lock themselves up and do things in isolation. Sometimes I like that, but most of the time I don't. I mean, most of the time I much prefer to sort of be interacting with other people, and to have that sort of excitement and energy that you can have when you've got a group of people who are excited about working on the same problem. So I think, and I think in these areas like computational biology, it's just the case that, you can't do it all by yourself. I mean, we need to have a whole specialists from a whole lot of different fields. And that's also just, part of the way that science as a discipline is evolving these days. We're all becoming more and more specialized.
Right.
There's just more knowledge that's just out there, right? So we're all becoming really, really specialized people. But the important problems that need to be solved today, are usually not sort of within one of these sort of specialized silos. We've got to pull together people from different specialties and have them come together to attack, important problems.
One of the important problems you're working on right now is kind of looking at E. coli in a different way.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about what your current studies are about?
So there are a few different things that I work on, but the thing that you're talking about with E. coli has to do with biofuels. What we're interested in doing there, or what I've been doing, is developing a computer model of E. coli. And the reason for doing that is to understand how the genes, the genetics that are in E. coli map onto particular behaviors that we're interested in.
Okay.
Right? So there's a computer model that takes all of these genes that are in E. coli, and from that predicts what the organism is going to do. And specifically what we're interested in doing with the organism is to make it produce fuel.
Okay.
So what the computer program does is it helps to identify genetic designs, if you will, ways in which you can modify the genes in E. coli to make it into a good fuel-producing organism. So we're interested in a number of different products here. Biodiesel is a big area. Biogasoline also is something which is a very, very large area. What we're specifically working on is a molecule called fatty acid, or fatty acids, and they're very closely related to these fuel molecules. So in the lab, we're taking these computer designs, making those genetic modifications to E. coli, producing the organisms, and testing them.
Let me ask you two questions associated with that one. Yeah. One, most of us perceive E. coli as kind of a not nice organism. Yeah. It tends to make folks sick, and there are lots of things. So I think I'm a little fascinated that it really is used in a different context here. Yeah. And can you give us a larger working definition of a biodiesel? I think most of us think of diesel as gasoline, so what is a biodiesel? Okay.
So going to that first question about E. coli, so there is this, the first thing that people think of when you say E. coli is these organisms that make you sick.
Correct.
In fact, that's actually a very small, there are a lot of different strains of E. coli, and the strains of E. coli that make people sick are actually a very small percentage of all the strains that are out there. And in fact, we depend on E. coli. So we all have E. coli in our gut. Okay. It's part of this sort of microbial flora that exists in the human body. So we carry a whole lot of microbes around with us that help us to digest food and do all kinds of important things, and we wouldn't be able to live without them. Specifically, the E. coli that we use in the lab is a non-pathogenic strain. It doesn't make people sick. And the reason that we use it is because people have actually been working with this organism for a long time, and genetically, it's a very, very simple organism to manipulate and to do things with. And so for doing the kinds of things that we want to do with the computer modeling and with the sort of the modifications of E. coli, it's an ideal organism for doing that. So it's funny how we have this conception of E. coli, but in fact, it's one of the most useful organisms out there for doing biological work. On your second question as to what biodiesel is, it's actually a molecule which is quite different from diesel, fossil fuel diesel, but it burns in more or less the same way. So it's the molecule is what they call a fatty acid ethyl ester, but you can take that and put it into existing diesel engines, and it more or less works fine.
And your research in your lab, are you working currently with undergraduate students or graduate students at Camden? Are you looking to expand to include them? Kind of tell me about the team that you've comprised at Camden in terms of moving ahead.
Right. So I've just started here at Rutgers Camden. I started on September 1st, So I'm at these early stages of building up the group again. I had a group from where I was working previously in Australia, and I brought one of those students with me from Australia.
Okay.
But right now I'm in this intensive period where I'm trying to recruit people. So I've been interviewing postdocs, and I'm looking to take on new grad students for the new academic year.
Okay.
And of course, you know, once we get things set up a little bit more, I'm looking also to involve undergraduates because, you know, I think it's a lot of fun to get undergraduates involved in research. They're often some of the most excited people about the work and about all the possibilities, and it's just great to have that energy.
Now, you said that E. coli was one of the things that you were working on. Can you give us kind of some overview of other projects that you're working on or you hope to be working on over the next few years?
Sure. So the other organism that I do a lot of modeling of is Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So you can probably guess from the name that this is the bacterium that causes tuberculosis disease.
Okay.
And it's, you know, tuberculosis is a fascinating disease, but it's also, you know, one of the most serious diseases that's affecting the world right now. So it's one of the big three infectious diseases, HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis, that account for most of the disease load that's in infectious diseases that's being carried throughout the world today. So there, what I do is I do computer modeling of tuberculosis to try to identify which genes you would try to interrupt with genes if you wanted to develop the next generation of drugs, because tuberculosis, like a lot of other organisms that we have drugs for, is rapidly developing resistances to those drugs. So we're constantly in this process of looking for new drugs that are going to
so the resurgence of tuberculosis just happened. I know there's lots of tuberculosis cases that have been reported in the U.S. over the past few months.
Yeah.
So that's become resistant to the medicine that's kind of been built up, so you're looking to figure out how to kind of combat that and create new medicines?
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell. So there's, you know, when you hear about tuberculosis in the press, you know, it could be just the regular run-of-the-mill tuberculosis, which is sensitive to the existing drugs.
Okay.
But what's happening is that all throughout the world, you know, we're seeing the emergence of drug-resistant strains. And if one of those strains really develops and becomes highly drug-resistant, it's also just a matter of time that it would get. I mean, most of this disease is evolving, obviously, in the third world, in Africa. But if a highly drug-resistant strain develops there, then it could very easily spread from there into developed countries, and we don't have drugs or methods for dealing with them.
Wow. I'm a little overwhelmed, fascinated, and all those kind of things with the work that you're doing. You're doing some great stuff. I'm glad you're at Rutgers. Welcome, officially, on behalf of Rutgers. I also want to thank you for joining us today. It was great to have you.
All right. Thank you so much, Bill.
No problem. We're going to ask you to stick around for the second part of the show. So anyway. Hello, I'm Bill Leipold, and welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Joining me is Victoria Chase, Clinical Associate Professor of Rutgers Camden School of Law. Victoria, welcome.
Thank you.
You're currently working with domestic violence folks.
Yes, yes.
And so can you talk to me a little bit about what you're doing and kind of how you approach your job?
Oh, sure. So in my program, we provide free legal services to victims of domestic violence. Camden and Essex counties in New Jersey have really high rates of both crimes associated with domestic violence as well as, you know, people who file for their own restraining order or protection from abuse order, as some people call it. And what we do is we have two programs. We have a volunteer program where law students provide sort of legal information to people going through the process who don't have an attorney. And then we also provide direct representation through the clinic that I teach. And so we'll do the trials, we'll help them with their child custody and their divorces potentially, and some other family law matters to sort of help them live independently from the person who's been responsible for abusing them.
So let's talk about this for a second. First of all, how do people find the services within the law school?
Well, so with respect to our program, we actually have a courthouse presence.
Okay.
There are students who are present in the courthouse every day that restraining order hearings are heard in Camden County. And what we do is we basically, ask every person who's a plaintiff in a restraining order hearing, do you know about this process? Would you like to talk to someone about the process and learn a little bit about your legal rights and remedies? And so we have a community-based presence so that's the main way that people connect with our program. But then, the web has really made it much easier to connect with folks as well. So we have a web presence too.
Are the services free? How
Absolutely.
Okay, so
Yep.
someone is in trouble,
Yeah.
has a restraining order, can work with your area, and your area is free to be able to come in and do that? Or how do people set up appointments? Or
Sure. So what we do is, so in Camden there are, many people who file for their restraining order, who file for a restraining order each year, and so there's no way we could assist all of them with direct representation.
Right.
But what we do is we assume that many folks are going to be going through the process without an attorney, and so our volunteer project is designed to basically connect with as many people as possible. And in 2009, we served 802 people, which is a pretty significant number. And what we do is we probably spend anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour with an individual or more, if we need to, just explaining the process so they understand what they're doing. Occasionally, there's an individual who, for whatever reason, wants to be referred to legal services to get representation, to have an attorney who actually handles their case for them. And then we can refer that person back to our own clinic or to other legal service providers in the area. We also, you can just call us directly, and we have the capacity to do an intake over the telephone, determine whether or not it's something that we can assist the person with, and then assign a team of students to directly represent them.
So how does one, in your position, make a decision about who's going to get the 15 minutes and who you're going to spend time with in terms of representation?
Okay, so in terms of who we work with, the first thing is that we're not competing with the private bar. And so if you are an individual with a high income who can easily pay for legal services, we'll refer you to a private practicing attorney who could help you with the case if that's what you want. And so there is an income threshold that we work with. But the vast majority of people who are in this situation are facing, sort of a change in their livelihood, maybe a change in the place that they live. Maybe they're no longer going to be with someone who was a breadwinner in their family. And so many folks do not have the resources available to pay for an attorney. And so in that instance, that would be the first question we would try to find out, which is, do you have enough money to pay for an attorney or not? If they don't, then other factors that we look at are things like, are you someone who reads and writes English?
Right.
Or speaks English, because if you're not, you may benefit from an attorney who could help you with, with your case. Are you an individual who is intimidated by the court process, or are you someone who maybe the defendant on the other side is represented by an attorney, and that would seriously change, potentially the balance of power that would be in that particular situation. Those are some of the things. We also prioritize persons with disabilities, the elderly, and things of that nature as well.
Well, persons with disabilities, you know a lot about that.
I know a little, yeah. That's how I came to this work.
I was going to say, can you talk a little bit about your background with persons with disabilities?
Sure. So in 2000, I guess in 2000 was when 2002, I'm sorry. In 2002, I was tired of doing the regular corporate defense type style practice of law, and I left private practice and became the executive director of a nonprofit that provides free legal services to people with disabilities. And for me, I've always been very motivated by the concept of access to justice.
Right.
That our courts are essentially a mysterious entity for most people. They don't understand many of the basics of how a court functions, how the legal process functions. It's very intimidating for people. And if you have a limited income and can't work and you can't retain an attorney, then it's even more difficult to navigate that system. And so I became involved with this organization that does free legal services for people with disability. And amongst the many things that we did, domestic violence was one of the services we provided, because domestic violence violence as a problem has a disproportionate impact on persons with disabilities. So it was a significant portion of our services.
So let's talk about the idea of clinics.
Sure.
It's New Jersey, both Newark and Camden law schools are known for their clinics. Can you talk to me about the rationale and the purpose behind clinics and how it's important to the law school experience?
Oh, absolutely. So, you know, when I was in law school, which I graduated from Rutgers Camden in 1998 from their law school there, we had a small clinical program and an externship program, but we did not really have the capacity to serve most students who wanted the opportunity to experience practicing law before they graduated. Now we really are able to give this opportunity to many of our students every year, which is really great, because the average law student doesn't finish law school really able to practice law on their own. They still need mentoring, they need training, they need someone who's more experienced to help them through and show them the ropes. Well, and that's a lot of what we do while someone's still a student. Our students, basically, we are like coaches. You know, we coach them through their matters and help them learn how to practice law, so they're not entirely out on their own. You know, they're not subject to, you know, a boss who may or may not have their best interest at heart. It's really, you know, they're learning to practice in a controlled environment with someone who's an expert. And so we think it's a significant connection between sort of the more theoretical aspects of their education and then the practical application of what they've learned.
Now, a lot of what you said is interesting to me because I'm trying to imagine, do they get to see a client by themselves? Do they okay. So they see a client with them by themselves and then they debrief you afterwards?
Yes.
Okay, so there's really a lot of one-on-one.
Yeah, I'm sort of also, you know, I have to be the seer, right? I have to listen to what my students say and be able to sort of figure out what more do I need to learn about the case from them and how to show them sort of how to interview a client without actually having been there, you know, to demonstrate it. One of the reasons why we don't insert ourselves in the room when our students are meeting with clients normally, occasionally it does happen, is because if I'm there, the client wants to talk to the expert, and I tend to disrupt the process and not really allow the student to have the full experience that they would otherwise have. And so I have to really, you know, get myself out of the picture in order to be able to let them have the opportunity to really do it for themselves.
Now, Rutgers Camden, how many clinics are there?
So we have, that's actually an interesting question, because we have 4 clinics that operate full-time within the law school and provide direct representation. We have the domestic violence clinic, we have a civil practice clinic which does general civil legal work and focuses on things like elder law and immigration as well. And that's been around since I think early in the 90s, so that's our longest running clinic. We also have a clinic that focuses on child abuse and neglect work, so we represent kids who are involved in the foster care system through that program. And then we do work for kids who have been accused of committing crimes. And I mean, as you may know, we have a disproportionate number of kids in Camden who are involved in both the foster system and have been accused of committing crimes. And so that's a significant service to our population in Camden. We also have a couple of hybrid clinics where we partner with outside entities, you know, one that does LGBT work, and then another clinic that does some police brutality and other constitutional type of litigation. And then we have another professor who does work in international human rights litigation, which is fantastic. And we also have a small business counseling program, which is sort of also like a hybrid clinic in that respect.
Now, one of the things we did fail to share at this particular point is you're a chair of the clinic experience. So as a chair, how do you kind of put all those priorities together? It sounds to me like potentially great demand and a lot of great community partnerships going on. How does someone deal with the demands of such a job?
So the time demands?
Time demands, needs, wants?
Sure. So I think, well, I mean, for me, I love being involved in the process of developing programs. And that is almost like recreational for me. So there's an aspect of my work where thinking creatively about how to bring together, you know, the improvements in the curriculum for our students, the needs of the community in Camden, you know, the resources that we have to deliver. For me, that is actually just fun. And so, that's just an enjoyable part of being the department chair. The other parts of it, I have to balance between the needs of my students, my time in court with the students, as well as the needs of the department and the people that I work with within the department, the staff that I supervise, as well as the other faculty members. So it is a balance.
Well, it also sounds like your background kind of put you together for this.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
some ways.
A bit.
We talked a little bit about you coming and working as a nonprofit. You left kind of private work, but there's a little bit more to all that. You have a kind of rich, diverse history.
I do, and I have so that has given me a chance to see the practice of law from many different angles. And so I've done lots of different things. I have at least, a small understanding of how various clinical programs and civil legal services work across the board. And so that helps me with respect to, helping to determine what programs we should be doing, what's cost effective for us, what's what would offer good experiences to students versus, be entirely dependent upon the expertise of the faculty member, because you want matters that are really ripe for a person who's a novice, a student who's a novice in the practice. And so that's been really helpful. And I had that management background already, so it wasn't like, doing something new in that regard. And so that experience has been really, really helpful.
When you start to see the clinics 3 to 5 years from now,
sure.
Is there something you want to be able to add to it, something you want to grow? What are your kind of goals?
Oh, yes. So we're working right now. I mean, I'd really like to be able to work with the business community in Camden with we have a small business counseling program. I'd like to be able to do more than that and have a full-blown in-house clinic that does that kind of work. I mean, it's definitely on our radar in terms of our priority of civic engagement, that we think this is something this is a service we could deliver to startup businesses and nonprofits, before they're really able to pay for an attorney for themselves. And the redevelopment of Camden is just a critical necessity as far as we're concerned as a campus. And so that's one of the things that we'd very much like to do. There's others too, but that clearly is a priority for us.
Good. Well, my producer's in my ear basically saying we have to get moving on. But I would love to bring you back to hear about the growth of the clinics, kind of what's happening.
Okay.
It's great to have you here.
Thank you. This was a real pleasure.
No problem. Thanks for coming.
Sure.
So that's all the time we have for this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. For more information about any of the subjects we discussed here today, please visit our website at rutgers.tv. For all of us at the Rutgers Division of Continuing Studies, I'm Bill Leipold, and thank you for watching.